The
"Is your
doctors were
dad
talking
coming
about the
today?"
test results
A
again.
pause. Too long
Are
a
you doing
pause.
okay?
Then Noah's voice, quiet, almost apologetic. "He has work. He fixes stuff. It's not a big deal." Daniel stood just outside the door, close enough to hear every word, and felt something in
Blood
his
work
chest
again, and
crack
it's
quietly in
confirmed.
half.
The treatment isn't
Because his
working for the
son wasn't
child.
lying to
I'm
protect
so
him.
sorry. We've
He
done
was
all we
lying
can
to
do.
protect himself
There is no
from what
easy
the
way
other
to say
kids would
this.
say next. 10 years, Daniel thought. 10 years of showing up, and it took one hospital ward, one afternoon, for his son to learn to be embarrassed of him. He almost turned around and walked back to the parking lot. Almost. But 3 hours earlier, this had just been an ordinary Tuesday. The city of Denver was waking up slow and gray, the kind of morning where the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. Inside a small apartment on the edge of town, 38-year-old Daniel Carter stood at the stove, flipping pancakes he'd already flipped 1,000 times before. Same pan, same spatula with the melted handle, same quiet hum of the radio in the background. Some things, he learned, you don't change. Not when your son needs at least one thing in his life that stays exactly the same. Down the hallway, the door creaked open. 10-year-old Noah shuffled out in his socks, dragging a small blanket behind him like he still did some mornings, even though he'd deny it if anyone asked. His face was pale under the kitchen light, thinner than it used to be, the kind of thin that worried a father more than any fever ever could. "Morning, buddy," Daniel said, not turning around, keeping his voice light on purpose. "Pancakes or eggs first?" "Pancakes," Noah mumbled, sliding into the chair at the small kitchen table. "Obviously." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile a parent wears like armor. "Obviously," he repeated. He set the plate down in front of his son and sat across from him, watching Noah pick at the food more than eat it. That had become normal too. Everything about the last 11 months had slowly rearranged what normal meant. 11 months ago, Noah had been an ordinary fourth grader, the kind of kid who came home covered in dirt from the schoolyard and complained about homework like it was a personal insult. Then came the fatigue that wouldn't go away, the bruises that showed up without explanation, the trip to the pediatrician that turned into a trip to a specialist, then another specialist, then a word neither of them wanted to say out loud in the beginning, until eventually they had no choice but to say it every single day. Leukemia. Daniel remembered the exact chair he was sitting in when he heard it, remembered the exact sound the air conditioning made in that office, a low hum that never stopped, that he still hears sometimes in his sleep. He remembered thinking, in the stupid sideways way the mind works under shock, that he needed to fix the loose bolt on the waiting room chair, as if fixing something, anything, could hold the rest of the world together. He hadn't cried in front of Noah, not once. Not that day, not in the 11 months since. There would be time to fall apart later, he told himself. Right now, his son needed a father standing upright. "You've got that face again," Noah said, around a mouthful of pancake, pulling Daniel back into the kitchen, into the moment. "What face?" "The thinking too hard face," Noah pointed his fork at him. "Dr. Ahmed says you should relax more, lower your, what was it, cortisol?" Daniel laughed, a real one this time, surprised out of him. "Since when do you know what cortisol is?" "Since I have literally nothing else to do in that room but read pamphlets," Noah said deadpan. And for a second, just a second, he sounded exactly like the healthy, smart-mouthed kid he used to be before any of this started. Daniel held on to that second like a lifeline. They had a rhythm to hospital days now, and it never failed to comfort them both. Every morning, before they walked into that building that smelled of antiseptic and fear, Daniel would put his hand on Noah's shoulder in the parking lot, look him dead in the eye, and say the same 4 words. "Team Carter, no exceptions." And Noah would answer, every single time, no matter how tired or scared or sick he felt. No exceptions. It was a small thing. A silly thing, really. Just words a father made up one bad night to give his son something solid to hold on to. But it had become sacred to both of them. The one ritual that never changed, no matter what the doctors said, no matter what the tests showed. Daniel drove Noah to Denver Children's that morning like he had almost every week for nearly a year. radio playing low, Noah's hand occasionally drumming along to a song on the dashboard when he had the energy for it. Today looked like it might be a good day. Those were rare enough that Daniel had learned to treasure every single one. "You working today?" Noah asked as they pulled into the parking garage. "Half day," Daniel said. "Got a generator job out by the old Hendricks warehouse. Should be done by 2, maybe 2:30. "You always say that." "And I'm always right," Daniel said, throwing the truck in park. "You were an hour late last Tuesday." "That generator fought back," Daniel said, solemnly. "It had a personality disorder." Noah laughed, an actual laugh, bright and unguarded, the sound Daniel would trade every hour of sleep he had left to hear more of. It didn't happen often anymore. When it did, Daniel filed it away carefully, like a photograph he'd want to look at later. They checked in at the front desk, the woman there, Carol, greeting them both by name the way she always did. "There's my favorite troublemaker," Carol said, winking at Noah. "There's my favorite person who gives out extra pudding cups," Noah shot back, and Carol laughed, waving them through toward the pediatric oncology ward. Room 214 had been Noah's room for this round of treatment. A small space with a window that looked out over the parking garage, which Noah had complained about exactly once before deciding the parking garage pigeons were, in his words, weirdly entertaining. Daniel settled him in, checked in with the nurse on shift, and hovered a moment longer than necessary, the way he always did. "Go," Noah said, not unkindly. "The generator's waiting. It has feelings, remember?" "Deep feelings," Daniel agreed. He leaned down, kissed the top of his son's head, breathed in that hospital shampoo smell that had become as familiar to him as anything from home. Team Carter. "No exceptions," Noah said, already reaching for the tablet on his bedside table. Daniel drove to the Hendricks warehouse with the radio up loud, the way he did every time he had to leave that room and pretend the drive wasn't the hardest part of his day. He spent the next 4 hours elbow deep in a generator that had, as promised, developed something resembling a personality disorder. Sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cold, grease working its way permanently into the creases of his knuckles. Work was good for him. Work didn't ask him how he was holding up. Work just needed fixing. And fixing was the one thing in the last 11 months Daniel Carter had always been able to do. His phone buzzed around 1:30. A text from the hospital's parent liaison, a woman named Renata, who Daniel had gotten to know well over the past year. "Hi, Daniel. Just a reminder. Monthly Family Connection Hour is today at 3 p.m. in the ward common room. Would love to see you both there if you can make it." Daniel felt the small flicker of guilt he always felt when he'd forgotten something. Family Connection Hour was a chance for the families on the ward to gather, share a meal, let the kids feel less like patients and more like children for an hour. Noah had mentioned it last week, actually mentioned it twice, which for a boy who rarely asked for anything anymore meant it mattered more than he'd let on. Daniel looked at the generator, at the 2 hours of work still ahead of him, and made his decision without hesitating. He'd finish enough to be safe and come back for the rest tomorrow. Some things could wait. This wasn't one of them. He arrived at the hospital just after 2:45, still in his work clothes, tool bags slung over one shoulder because there hadn't been time to swing by the apartment. His boots were dusted with concrete, and grease stained his forearms up to the elbow. He caught his reflection in the elevator doors on the way up and grimaced slightly. Not exactly parent-teacher conference material. But Noah had never cared about that. Not once in 10 years. The elevator doors opened onto the pediatric ward, and Daniel walked the familiar hallway toward room 214, planning to grab Noah and walk him down to the common room together. He was maybe 15 feet from the door when he heard voices, and something in the tone made him slow his steps. A boy's voice, one Daniel didn't recognize, coming from inside or just outside the room. "Is your dad coming today?" A pause. Daniel almost smiled, ready to step in and surprise them both, when Noah's voice answered, and the smile died before it fully formed. "He has work," Noah said, and there was something in his voice Daniel had never heard directed at him before. Something careful, something small. He fixes stuff. It's not a big deal. Daniel stopped walking entirely. He stood frozen in the hallway, one hand still gripping the strap of his tool bag, and felt the floor tilt slightly under him in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. It wasn't what Noah said, it was how he said it. Quiet, apologetic, like he was bracing for a verdict. The other boy's voice again, older, more confident. "My dad's a cardiologist. He works right here, actually. 3rd floor." "Cool," said Noah. Just that. Cool. Flat. Small. Daniel stood there, unmoving, his chest tight in a way he didn't have a name for. 10 years of parenting, and he had weathered every hard moment life had thrown at his son with something close to steadiness, the diagnosis, the needles, the long nights. But this small, quiet moment of his son shrinking himself down to fit into an apology, this hit different. This hit somewhere Daniel didn't know he could still be hurt. He thought about walking away, just for a second, going back down to the parking garage, sitting in his truck, giving himself a minute to breathe before he had to be strong again. But that wasn't who Daniel Carter was, and it never had been. Whatever this was, whatever had put that apology in his son's voice, Daniel needed to understand it before he could fix it. He stepped into the doorway. Noah was sitting up in bed, his tablet forgotten in his lap, talking to a boy who looked about 12, sitting in a wheelchair near the window, an IV pole beside him. The older boy's mother stood nearby, scrolling through her phone, half listening. Noah's eyes found his father in the doorway, and something complicated passed over his face, relief and dread arriving at exactly the same moment. "Dad," Noah sat up straighter, "you're early." "Traffic was light," Daniel said, keeping his voice easy, though his heart was still catching up. He nodded toward the other boy. "Hey there, I'm Daniel." "Marcus," Marcus said, polite enough, his eyes flicking briefly over Daniel's work clothes before returning to his tablet. Marcus's mother looked up from her phone, offered a thin, practiced smile. "Denise," she said, Marcus's mom. "You must be Noah's father." Her eyes moved over Daniel's grease-stained forearms, his dusty boots, the tool bag over his shoulder, and something in her expression shifted, just slightly, just enough for a father who was already listening for it to catch. "Well," Denise said, glancing at her watch, "we should get down to the common room. Marcus, sweetie, let's go." She wheeled her son out, offering Daniel a polite nod on the way, the kind of nod that managed to say nothing and everything at once. The room went quiet. Daniel sat down slowly in the chair beside Noah's bed, studying his son's face, the way Noah was very carefully not looking at him. "Hey," Daniel said softly, "you all right?" "Fine," Noah said, too fast. "Noah." "I'm fine, Dad." Noah picked at a loose thread on his blanket. "Can we just go to the thing, the family connection thing?" Daniel didn't push. Not yet. He'd learned over the last year that pushing too hard, too fast, usually made his son close up entirely, and right now, more than answers, Daniel wanted his son to feel safe. So he stood, held out his hand, and waited. "Come on then, buddy," he said. "Let's go see what kind of sad hospital snacks they've got today." That got a small, reluctant smile out of Noah, the first real one since Daniel had walked in. "Bet it's those little cheese cubes again." "God, I hope not," Daniel said, and Noah laughed, just a little, and for a moment things felt almost normal. They walked down the hallway together, Noah in a wheelchair Daniel pushed slowly, careful over every bump, a habit worn so deep into him now it was pure instinct. The common room was already filling up with families, folding tables set with juice boxes and cookies, a couple of nurses moving between groups with easy, practiced warmth. This was the hospital at its best, Daniel thought, a room built entirely around care. Denise and Marcus were seated near the window. A few other families Daniel didn't recognize sat scattered around, and near the center of the room, a woman Daniel did recognize, A nurse named Patricia, who had been on Noah's care team for months, waved them over with a warm smile. "There he is," Patricia said, crouching slightly to Noah's eye level. "You feeling up to a cookie today, troublemaker?" "Depends on how good the cookie is," Noah said, and Patricia laughed, the sound genuine and easy. Daniel got Noah settled at a table, then went to grab drinks for them both. On his way back, he passed close enough to Denise's table to hear her voice, lowered but not nearly low enough, speaking to another mother Daniel didn't know. "I just think it's a shame when kids don't have the same resources behind them. You can tell, the ones who have real support versus the ones who are just getting by." The other woman murmured something non-committal. "I don't mean anything by it, but if it were my son, I'd have found a way to get him into a private specialist by now. There's always a way if you really look." Daniel's jaw tightened, his hands going still around the 2 juice boxes he was carrying. He'd looked. He'd sold his truck 8 months ago for a second opinion trip to Cincinnati that turned out to confirm exactly what the first 3 doctors had already said. He'd picked up every double shift the city offered him. He'd slept in waiting room chairs more nights than he could count, and still, somehow, standing 15 feet away with 2 juice boxes in his hands, a stranger's voice was quietly, casually convincing him that none of it had been enough. He didn't say anything. He carried the drinks back to Noah, sat down across from him, and forced his face into something calm. But he'd caught something else in that moment, too, something that scared him more than Denise's careless cruelty ever could. He glanced at Noah and saw that his son had heard it too, saw it in the way Noah's shoulders had curled slightly inward, the way Noah had gone quiet again, picking at the paper straw of his juice box instead of drinking from it. A quiet child, Daniel had learned over the last 11 months, was never a good sign. "Hey," Daniel said gently, "you still with me?" Noah nodded, not looking up. "Yeah." "Are you sure?"
"Dad." Noah's voice had an edge to it now, quiet but sharp. "Can we just not, please?" Daniel let it go, for now, though everything in him wanted to push further. He understood, in the deep and complicated way only a parent can, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is wait until your child is ready to hand you the truth themselves. They stayed another 20 minutes. Noah ate half a cookie and didn't touch the cheese cubes, which turned out to indeed make an appearance. Patricia stopped by twice more, chatting easily, and for those small stretches Noah seemed to relax, laughing once at something she said about the hospital's ancient vending machine that ate more dollar bills than it dispensed snacks. But every time Denise's table erupted in easy, comfortable laughter nearby, Daniel watched his son go quiet again. By the time they walked back to room 214, Daniel had made a decision. He wasn't going to force it, but he wasn't going to let it sit either. He got Noah settled back into bed, checked his oxygen monitor out of habit, even though it wasn't his job to, and sat down in the chair beside him. "Noah," he said quietly, "I need you to talk to me. Not because you're in trouble, because I love you, and something's wrong, and I can't fix what I don't understand." Noah stared at the blanket for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so small Daniel had to lean in to catch it. "Marcus asked if you were coming today, and I told him you were working, fixing stuff." He swallowed hard, and he kind of laughed. Not mean exactly, just like it was funny, like it wasn't a real job. Daniel kept his voice steady, though something in his chest ached fiercely. "And that bothered you?" "No," Noah said, too fast, and then, quieter, "Yes." He finally looked up, eyes glassy. "I didn't say anything back, Dad. I just said cool and let him think it. I didn't tell him you rewired half this hospital's backup systems during the blackout last winter. I didn't tell him anything. I just let him think you're not." He stopped, unable to finish. "Not what, buddy?" Daniel said softly, though he already knew. "Not enough," Noah whispered, and then, immediately, guilt crashing into his face. "I didn't mean that.
I don't think that. I don't, Dad. I swear I don't. But for like 1 second, when Marcus's mom was talking to that other lady, I just felt so embarrassed. And then I felt so bad for feeling embarrassed. And I don't even understand why I felt anything at all, because you're the best dad. You're literally the best dad. And I still just sat there and let them think you were less than his dad. And I hate that I did that. His voice cracked entirely in the last few words. Daniel sat in silence for a moment, letting his son's confession settle in the room between them, feeling something crack open in his own chest at the same time. "Hey," Daniel said softly, reaching over to take his son's hand. "Look at me." Noah did, reluctantly, eyes wet. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're 10 years old, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by people who have no idea what your life actually looks like. Of course you got quiet. Of course, for 1 second, you wondered if it would be easier if I were someone else." His voice caught slightly, and he let it. "That's not betrayal, buddy. That's just being a scared kid in a hard place. I need you to hear that."
"But I didn't defend you," Noah said, tears finally spilling over. "You don't have to defend me," Daniel said, gripping his hand tighter. "That's not your job. It's never been your job. My job is to make sure you never have to." Noah wiped his face with the free hand, embarrassed now for an entirely different reason. "I still feel bad." "I know," Daniel said gently. "That feeling means you've got a good heart. It doesn't mean you did something unforgivable." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Can I tell you something, though?" Noah nodded. "Denise back there," Daniel said something to another mom while I was getting our drinks, about families who don't have enough resources, about how she'd have found a way if it were her kid. He kept his voice even, though it cost him something to do it. And for a second, I let it get to me, too. I started doing the math on every double shift, every dollar, every night in a waiting room chair, wondering if I'd missed something, wondering if I hadn't done enough. Noah's eyes widened slightly. "You think that too? Even though you sold the truck? Even though you're always here?" "Every parent thinks that, buddy. Every single one. The good ones just don't let it stop them from showing up the next day anyway." They sat with that for a moment, something between them settling, some of the day's weight easing, if only slightly. Noah's hand was still in his father's, and for the first time since Daniel had walked into that hallway and heard his son apologize for him, something in his chest unclenched. "I don't want to feel embarrassed of you again," Noah said quietly. "You might," Daniel said honestly, because he had never once lied to his son, not even to make things easier. "Kids get embarrassed of their parents. It happens whether anyone's sick or not. What matters is what you do after." "What do I do after?" Daniel smiled, tired but real. "You let it pass. And tomorrow, you tell Marcus what backup generator systems actually keep running when the power goes out on this entire floor. See how funny fixing stuff sounds then." Noah huffed out something close to a laugh. "You really did that? The blackout thing?" 11 hours straight. This whole wing ran on backup power because 3 guys and I didn't sleep until every system on this floor was back online, including, he added, the machines keeping an eye on you that same week, actually. Noah stared at him. "Wait, that was you? During the storm? The nurses still talk about that." "Small world," Daniel said, shrugging like it was nothing, though it clearly wasn't nothing to Noah, whose whole face had shifted, something like pride creeping back into it. They didn't get the chance to talk much more that evening. Dinner came, then evening meds, then the slow, exhausted quiet that settled over the ward once visiting hours thinned out. Daniel stayed later than usual, reading to Noah from a comic book until his son's eyes grew heavy, until the room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the monitor and Noah's steady breathing. Daniel sat there a long while after his son fell asleep, thinking about the day, about the apology in his son's voice, about Denise's careless cruelty, about the 11 months behind them and the uncertain number of months still ahead. He thought about walking away in that hallway and was grateful, deeply grateful, that he hadn't.
The next morning, Daniel arrived at the hospital a little earlier than usual, coffee in hand, and found Renata, the parent liaison, waiting for him near the nurse's station with an odd, careful expression on her face. "Daniel, got a minute?" "Sure," he said, stomach tightening slightly out of old habit, the way it always did around unexpected hospital conversations.
"It's good news," Renata said quickly, catching his expression. "I promise." She led him a few steps down the hallway. "So Patricia mentioned something to me yesterday about the blackout last winter." She smiled. "And it turns out the hospital's been wanting to do something for the parents who go above and beyond for this ward for a while now. Nothing huge, just an acknowledgement. And your name came up, more than once, actually." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "I mean, I was just doing my job that night. Would have done it for any building." "That's exactly what Patricia said you'd say," Renata said, smiling wider. "There's a small recognition happening at this month's family dinner. Nothing formal, just the ward saying thank you, in front of everybody." She studied him a moment. "I know it's not really your style, but I think it might mean something to Noah, to see it happen." Daniel thought of his son's face the night before, the way pride had crept back into it at the mention of the blackout, replacing, even for a moment, the shame that had lived there hours earlier. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, I think it would." The family dinner came 2 weeks later, a modest gathering in the same common room, folding tables dressed up slightly with tablecloths for the occasion, the ward's small way of thanking the families who held it together. Daniel wore a clean shirt, no grease on his fins for once, though he still felt distinctly out of place among some of the more polished parents filling the room. Noah, sitting beside him in his wheelchair, looked healthier than he had in weeks, color back in his cheeks, a rare good stretch after his latest round of treatment. Patricia stood at the front of the room near the end of the meal, and without much fanfare, the way Daniel would have asked him if anyone had asked, thanked the families for their strength over the past year. Then she said something that made Daniel go very still. "I also want to take a second," Patricia said, "to recognize someone who probably doesn't think he deserves recognition, which is usually how you know someone really does." She smiled toward their table. "Last winter, during the storm that knocked out power across half this side of the city, Daniel Carter spent 11 hours, unpaid, making sure this ward's backup systems never failed. Every monitor, every IV pump, every single machine keeping our kids safe that night stayed running because of him and his crew." She paused. "I don't think most people understood what that meant at the time. I think we understand it now." The room broke into applause, gentle but genuine, and Daniel felt his face heat, unused to being on this side of gratitude. Beside him, Noah sat up straighter, glancing around the room, watching people's faces change, watching Denise, seated a few tables over, go quiet, her expression shifting from polite indifference into something more complicated. After the applause died down and conversation resumed, Denise approached their table, alone this time, without her usual audience. She stood there a moment, visibly uncomfortable, before speaking. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly, to Daniel, though her eyes flickered briefly to Noah too. "I said some things, weeks ago, that I shouldn't have, about resources, about families having enough support." She exhaled, something genuinely regretful crossing her face. "I was scared, if I'm honest. Marcus's surgery didn't go the way we hoped, and I think I was looking for somewhere to put that fear. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't true, and I'm sorry." Daniel studied her for a moment, no anger in him, only the tired understanding of a fellow parent who knew exactly how fear could twist a person sideways. "We're all just scared people trying to keep our kids alive," Daniel said simply. "You don't owe me anything, but thank you for saying it."
Denise's eyes went glassy and she nodded, quickly excusing herself, though something in her posture looked lighter walking away than it had walking over. Noah watched the whole exchange quietly, and once Denise was gone, he looked up at his father. "You weren't even mad at her." "Wasn't worth being mad," Daniel said. "She was scared. Scared people say things they don't mean." He nudged his son gently. Besides, feels better to just let it go, doesn't it? Lighter, somehow. Noah considered that for a moment and nodded slowly. Yeah, it does. They stayed a while longer, and later that evening, once the room had emptied and it was just the two of them again in the quiet of room 214, Noah spoke up from his bed, voice thoughtful in the dim light. Dad? Yeah, bud. When Marcus laughed, that day, about you fixing stuff. Noah paused. I felt embarrassed, and then I felt terrible for feeling embarrassed. He looked over at his father. But tonight, when Patricia said all that stuff in front of everyone, I don't know, I just felt really proud. Like more proud than I've ever felt of anything. Daniel walked over, sat on the edge of his bed, and put a hand gently on his son's shoulder. Whew. You know what the difference was? Noah shook his head. Nothing about me changed both days, Daniel said. I fixed generators both weeks. I came home with grease under my nails both weeks. The only thing that changed was what people said out loud. He squeezed his son gently, which means the shame was never about who I actually was. It was just about who people decided to see. And that's never something you should carry, buddy. Not for me, and not for yourself, not ever. Noah nodded slowly, letting the words settle. Showing up for you, he said quietly, almost to himself. That's the only thing that ever really mattered, isn't it? That's the only thing that ever mattered, Daniel agreed softly. Everything else is just noise. Noah smiled, a real one, small but steady, the kind that didn't need applause or recognition to exist. He reached for his father's hand, and Daniel held it, the way he had every single hard night for the past 11 months, the way he intended to hold it for every night still ahead of them, however many there would be. There was no dramatic ending to that day, no headline, no viral moment, no crowd gathering to celebrate. Just a boy and his father, in a quiet hospital room, having finally said out loud what both of them had needed to hear. But word traveled anyway, the way it does in places built on care. Denise mentioned it to another nurse. That nurse mentioned it to a family down the hall. Slowly, over the following weeks, something shifted in the way people on that ward looked at Daniel Carter, not because of a single dramatic reveal, but because of 100 small ones, quiet acts noticed one at a time, the kind of respect that builds itself brick by brick rather than arriving all at once. Denise brought Daniel a coffee one morning, unprompted, a small gesture that said more than words could. Marcus, weeks later, asked Noah if his dad could look at his own family's generator back home, and Noah answered without an ounce of hesitation this time. Yeah, he's really good at that. And somewhere in that answer, delivered without shrinking, without apology, without a single ounce of shame, Daniel Carter understood that his son had learned the one lesson he'd hoped more than anything else in this world to teach him. That showing up, quietly, faithfully, without needing anyone's applause, was never something to be ashamed of. It was the only thing worth being proud of at all.